We're really excited to have Ray Rhodes with us for Book of the Week on Social Church today. Ray Rhodes is the author of Susie, The Life and Legacy of Susie Spurgeon. Welcome to Social Church, Ray.
Thank you, David. It's a joy to be with you today.
Great. So, Ray, start us off. How did you come to write this book?
Yeah, well, like many people, I've loved Spurgeon for a long time. I think I read my first Spurgeon biography in maybe 1990.
Yeah.
Read a number after that, but really had little interest in his wife or his family, it seems, for some reason.
Yeah.
But later, I was able to pick up a little biography by Charles Ray done in 1903, The Life of Mrs. Charles Spurgeon. And I read that, and it was interesting, but still did not pursue any further study of her.
Yeah.
But I went back to seminary in 2013 at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And while there, I had to choose a thesis topic for my doctoral work. And I was looking into Spurgeon's marriage and his spirituality, and there I really began to discover Susie Spurgeon.
Yeah.
And boy, was I amazed at the accomplishments of this lady, her faithfulness to Christ and the gospel, her love for her husband. And so I began peeling back layers of her life. And as I talked with the publishing world, I found out there was interest in a biography of her, and the grace and mercy of God got connected to Moody Publishers. Moody Publishers, the first book, before it was called Moody Publishers, that was published through this publishing house, was Charles Spurgeon's All of Grace.
Wow.
And that was exciting to know, and it's been one of their best-selling books throughout history.
Yeah.
And it just seemed fitting that Susie would land here at Moody, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. Moody was excited about the project as well.
Yeah.
And so one thing led to another, and now we have a book about a fascinating woman.
Fantastic. And congratulations on the book as well, Ray. It's such a beautiful book, and really recommend it to all of our listeners. What can you tell us?
Thank you, David.
Yeah, a pleasure, Ray. What can you tell us about how Susie and Charles first met?
Yeah, well, Charles was a pastor in Waterbeach, which is north of London and north of Cambridge. There, a small village church. He became pastor at 17, and the church had about 40 people when he arrived. By the time he left there, I think over 400 people. It wouldn't hold all the folks there in the little village. But nevertheless, word got to London. The new Park Street Chapel, as the Metropolitan Tabernacle was called prior, of course it was a different location. It moved and became the Metropolitan Tabernacle. They were without a pastor. They had a long history of famous Baptist preachers, including John Gill and Benjamin Keach and John Rippon and others. But they were in much decline and needed a pastor, heard about Spurgeon and the providence of God, invited him to come as a guest preacher. Susie Thompson and her parents, R.B. Thompson and her mother, Susanna, attended the church. They were not members of the church. And she didn't go the Sunday morning he preached, but she did come that Sunday evening in the urging of some friends. Yeah. So she went, and she was really unimpressed with Charles. Susie's whole life was London, and other than that, Paris. So that kind of gives you her cultural perspective. She was from more of an upper middle class world, learned to speak French fluently in France. So Spurgeon was from the countryside, and he was what we would say here, a country boy, and she was a city girl.
Yeah.
Very refined, so she was unimpressed with him. But that was her first encounter. Whether they met that night, she couldn't remember, nor could he, if they met that evening or not. But she really didn't care much to meet him at that time, I don't think.
You've done some brilliant research into how Charles actually managed to pluck up the courage to ask Susie out on a date. Tell us a little bit about that, Ray.
Yeah, so that's in December when she hears him. In April of 1854, Charles is about to be installed as the pastor of the new Park Street Chapel. Yeah. And Susie is struggling spiritually. He gets word of that. He sends her a copy of The Pilgrim's Progress, a book he read at least 100 times before he died.
Wow.
And so that was the book he felt would help her the most. That opened the door for her to begin confiding in him about her spiritual challenges and struggles. And so he counseled, discipled her. But no indicator that there was any sort of romantic interest. At least Susie didn't know of any. Yeah. Until June, just a few months later, the grand reopening of the Crystal Palace there in South London, which was destroyed in the 1930s by fire. But nevertheless, it's a group from the New Park Street Chapel was attending. including Charles and Susie. And he had a book by Martin Tupper called Proverbial Philosophy in his hands, and he opened it to a section on marriage, pointed to a text, and whispered in Susie's ear. He says, "Do you pray for the one who is to be your husband?" And we might not get that today, but for some reason, Susie understood what he was saying. Yeah. And he then asked her to take a walk around the Crystal Palace and down out of the palace yard and down to the lake. And by the way, the ruins of the Crystal Palace are fascinating to me. I was able to go and walk down to the lake where Susie describes her heart rapidly beating and love blossoming. And the love story is really coming to fruition there and at the Crystal Palace on the grounds there at the lake where those dinosaur models still exist, in fact. And 2 months later, they're engaged. So quite a change from December, when she's totally unimpressed, to her engagement in August, less than a year later.
Fantastic. Really good stuff. What stands out for you, Ray? You've obviously spent a lot of time, in the archives looking at all of the letters and stuff that they've sent each other and all the history between them. What stands out for you in terms of what Suzanne had done most to support Charles in his ministry?
Yeah, well, one, she committed herself totally to his ministry early on. She, of course, was lonely because he was gone a lot, but nevertheless, she determined in her heart of hearts that she would never hinder him from his ministry, from his public ministry and any aspect of his ministry, regardless of how sick she might become or anything else. And she, by God's grace and through faith, she held on to that commitment throughout their marriage. Had he married someone else, it would have been very difficult because Charles was a unique person in all of Christian history. None of us can become Charles Spurgeon, nor should we desire to become him. We can learn from him. Yeah. But he was one of those unique characters in all of history that God had chosen for really a very large work. And Susie committed to that. She prayed for him diligently, encouraged him when he was depressed, served alongside of him in the church for the first 10 or 12 years of their marriage when she was physically able to. She would counsel the lady baptismal candidates, and many of them later gave testimony to how much she meant to them and how she had helped them. She traveled with him a lot. She was in Venice with him. She was in Geneva. She heard him preach from John Calvin's pulpit. So her days of health were especially spent in being very engaged in his public ministry. And then after she was too sick to travel any longer, she continued to pray for him, and they wrote each other. He wrote her every day. She responded. She prayed for him. She got involved in promoting his books, especially the first book that she was engaged in getting out there to other pastors, was Lectures to My Students, Volume 1. And that was really the beginning of Mrs. Spurgeon's book fund, which from 1875 until her death in 1903, she gave oversight to this ministry that ultimately gave away 200,000 books during that time period to very poor pastors in England, especially England, but not only England and other missionaries and whatnot. Many of them had large families. They could barely feed their family, barely clothe their family, and so they certainly would not spend their money on books because their family had such needs. Well, Susie recognized that this is a burden, really, that it is not helping. The pastors need help in their ministry. So she believed good books could help their churches, could help the pastor, but she also realized that the family needed relief. Their pastor was under great stress, not only at the church, but his family, seeing his children and his wife and their needs. So she helped with other ways. Sometimes she would send money and clothing, other items that would relieve some pressure from pastors. So she did that. She ultimately authored 5 standalone books, became the co-editor and a major contributor to the 4-volume autobiography of Charles Spurgeon. Edited his monthly magazine after he died for a while, The Sword and the Trowel. Even planted a church at Bexhill-on-Sea, still existing today, Beulah Baptist Church, and there's markers there about her ministry and her commitment to that church. She chose the pastor, in fact. So all of those things, so wonderful. But her greatest legacy was I think, is Charles Spurgeon. We have Charles Spurgeon in every bookstore, I think, and probably in America, most bookstores. And one reason that he is still so beloved here and there is because of Susie Spurgeon. If he had married a different wife, I don't think we would have him to the same extent that we have him today.
Yeah, amazing. What can we learn about their marriage in terms of what we can apply in our own lives today, Ray?
Yeah, I think we learned that sort of mutual commitment. They were both united in the ministry.
Yeah.
So they were not pulling against one another.
Yeah.
They were both committed to biblical spirituality, meaning especially Bible intake and prayer and the worship of God,
yeah,
which was their passion. They read the Bible individually. They had family worship regularly. And that deepened Susie so that when her sickness came and when Charles's sickness came, when he was battling theological controversies throughout, the last one being the great downgrade controversy, she did not panic or unravel during those times. She stood strong, and that helped to still him. Because he was really, the last one especially, he's brokenhearted. Even some of his own college men departed from him, abandoned him during that battle, and that broke his heart probably more than anything else. And it was really, at heart, he contended for the old faith. He contended for the authority and sufficiency, the full inspiration of Scripture against theological liberalism that was seeping into the Baptist Union then. And a lot of some of his old friends didn't stand with him, including his students, but his wife stood strong, and she did not abandon the faith. She did not panic or fall into discouragement. She soldiered on, and she recommitted herself to only supplying doctrinally sound, godly books to poor pastors. So she weathered those sort of storms with him. And then I think one other thing, we could mention 20, but they were communicators. They communicated when they were in person. They held hands. They talked. They prayed together. But also, they wrote beautiful love letters, letters of various sorts to one another. And so in our day of tweeting and instant messaging and various ways that we communicate, they actually took a dip pen and used paper and wrote letters, which really require a lot of thought. Yeah. And the letters that survive are very thoughtful letters. And so I think we can learn to persevere through hardships, to deepen ourselves spiritually, to be mutually committed on the same page of music, theologically and in ministry, but also just on the same page of music in every way that we can, and to be faithful to communicate one to another.
So interesting, Ray. Brilliant. So what's next for you then, Ray? I know you're very busy at the moment talking about your brilliant book, Susie. Have you got any more books inside you? You plan on writing anything else?
Yes, he recently signed a contract with Moody Publishers.
Great.
For a companion volume, but also a standalone volume. It will be titled, the working title is Spurgeon in Love, a persevering Victorian romance.
Wow, brilliant.
So we'll dive even deeper into more Charles, more emphasis on Charles this time, perhaps than last.
Brilliant.
But more deepening look at their marriage and relationship, and also how we can learn from that.
Brilliant, Ray. We'll look forward to that, Ray. Thank you so much for your time today. We'll put a link into the description below so that people can buy the copy of their book as well. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hopefully speaking to you about your next book, Ray, when it comes out.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your ministry, and I pray that the Lord will bless you for His glory and the good of many.
Thank you so much, Ray. Brilliant.